I should have trusted my instincts the moment I saw the house. Thornfield Manor squatted against the gray October sky like a wound that wouldn't heal, its Victorian bones sagging under the weight of too many winters. The iron gate creaked a warning as I pushed through, my suitcase wheels catching on the cracked stone path that led to the front door. But I needed this job. Desperately. The advertisement had been sparse. Live-in caretaker needed for elderly woman. Room and board provided. Quiet countryside location. Serious inquiries only. The pay was generous. Too generous, really, for basic caregiving work. But after 3 months of unemployment and a landlord threatening eviction, I wasn't in a position to question good fortune. Mrs. Blackwood answered the door herself, which surprised me. I'd expected someone bedridden to have another caretaker, at least temporarily. She was smaller than I'd imagined, probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her grip was surprisingly strong when she shook my hand. "You must be Sarah," she said, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent I couldn't place. "I trust your journey wasn't too difficult?" "Not at all," I lied. The GPS had lost signal twice and I'd gotten turned around on the narrow country roads that seemed to fold in on themselves. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mrs. Blackwood." She studied me with those unsettling eyes. "Come in. We have much to discuss." The interior of Thornfield Manor was a study in faded grandeur. Heavy curtains blocked most of the natural light, casting everything in sepia tones. Dust motes danced in the few shafts of sunlight that managed to pierce through, and the air held the peculiar smell of old houses, wood polish, potpourri, and something else I couldn't identify. Something organic and slightly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. Mrs. Blackwood led me through a maze of corridors lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to track our movement. The floorboards groaned under our feet, and I noticed how she avoided stepping on certain planks, as if she knew exactly which ones would protest. "Your room is on the second floor," she said, pausing at the foot of a grand staircase. "The third floor is storage, nothing of interest there. The basement—" She paused, her fingers tightening on the banister. "The basement is off limits." "Of course," I said, though something in her tone made my skin prickle. "No, dear, you don't understand." She turned to face me fully, and I was struck by the intensity in her gaze. "The basement door is locked, and it must remain so, especially after midnight. This is not a suggestion. It is the only rule I have, and it is absolute." The way she said it, with such gravity, such emphasis, sent a chill down my spine. "I understand." "Do you?" Her head tilted slightly, bird-like. "Because previous caretakers have struggled with curiosity. It's a dangerous thing, curiosity. Previous caretakers. Plural. How many had there been and why had they left?" She led me upstairs to my room, which was comfortable enough, a 4-poster bed, a writing desk by the window, and a small adjoining bathroom. The window looked out over the back garden, where I could see the remnants of what had once been an elaborate maze, now overgrown and wild. "Your duties are simple," Mrs. Blackwood explained, settling into a wingback chair with visible relief. It was then I noticed the tremor in her hands, the way she favored her left side. "I require assistance with meals, medication, and bathing. I spend most of my time in the sitting room or my bedroom. The kitchen is well stocked, and you'll find a list of my dietary restrictions on the refrigerator." Over the next hour, she showed me around the main floor. The kitchen with its ancient but functional appliances, the sitting room where she spent her days, and her bedroom on the ground floor. I noticed she moved carefully, as if in pain, though she never complained. "Are you expecting any visitors?" I asked as we returned to the sitting room. "Family members? Friends?" Something flickered across her face. Sadness, perhaps, or regret. "No. No visitors. It's just us now." That first evening passed quietly. I prepared a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches, helped Mrs. Blackwood with her medications, a surprising array of bottles for someone who seemed relatively healthy, and settled her in for the night. By 10 o'clock, The house was silent except for the settling sounds old buildings make. I tried to read in my room, but I found myself listening to the night sounds instead. The wind whistled through gaps in the window frames, creating an almost musical quality that was both soothing and unsettling. Somewhere in the walls, pipes gurgled and ticked. And beneath it all, so faint I almost missed it, was another sound. Scratching. It was rhythmic, like fingernails on wood, coming from somewhere below my room. I pressed my ear to the floor, but the sound stopped abruptly, as if whatever was making it knew I was listening. The basement, I thought. It had to be coming from the basement, but that was impossible. Mrs. Blackwood had said it was locked, unused. Maybe it was mice, or the house settling, or my imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place. The scratching didn't return that night, and I eventually fell asleep to the sound of wind in the eaves. I woke the next morning to Mrs. Blackwood calling my name. Her voice was strained, almost panicked, and I hurried downstairs to find her sitting on the edge of her bed, fully dressed but clearly distressed. "Are you all right?" I asked, immediately checking her pulse and looking for signs of medical emergency. "I had the most dreadful dreams," she said, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. She was calling again. Always calling. Who was calling? Mrs. Blackwood blinked, as if coming back to herself. I'm sorry, dear. Sometimes the nights are difficult. Old memories, you understand." I didn't understand, but I helped her to the sitting room and prepared her breakfast. She seemed more fragile in the morning light, and I noticed dark circles under her eyes. Had she slept at all? The day passed peacefully enough. Mrs. Blackwood was a good patient, polite, undemanding, content to sit by the window with her needlework while I cleaned and organized. She had an extensive library, and I spent the afternoon cataloging books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. It was while I was dusting the lower shelves that I found the photograph. It was tucked between 2 volumes of poetry, a black and white image of a young woman who looked startlingly like me. Same dark hair, same oval face, same wide-set eyes. She was standing in front of Thornfield Manor, but the manor in the photograph looked different. Younger, somehow. Less weathered. The garden was immaculate, and there were no bars on the basement windows. Bars on the basement windows. I hadn't noticed those before. "Who is this?" I asked, bringing the photograph to Mrs. Blackwood. Her reaction was immediate and violent. The needlework fell from her hands, and she pressed herself back into her chair as if I'd shown her a snake. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In the library. She looks like—" "Put it away." Her voice was sharp, authoritative. "Put it away and don't speak of it again." I tucked the photograph into my pocket, disturbed by her reaction. The resemblance was uncanny. The woman could have been my sister, or even me in period costume. Who was she, and why did her image cause Mrs. Blackwood such distress? That night, the scratching returned. It was louder this time, more insistent, definitely coming from below, somewhere in the basement. I lay in bed listening to it, trying to make sense of the rhythm. It almost sounded like Morse code. 3 short scratches, pause, 3 long ones, pause, 3 short again, SOS. The thought sent ice through my veins. But that was ridiculous. It was probably just a trapped animal, a squirrel or raccoon that had found its way into the basement through some gap in the foundation. I would mention it to Mrs. Blackwood in the morning. But when morning came, I found her in the kitchen, standing at the basement door. She was still in her nightgown, barefoot, with her hand pressed against the heavy wooden door. Her eyes were closed, and she was whispering something I couldn't quite hear. "Mrs. Blackwood?" I approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. Her face was twisted with grief, her eyes wild and unfocused. "She's crying," Mrs. Blackwood said. "Can't you hear her crying?" I listened but heard nothing except the usual house sounds. "Who's crying?" "My daughter." The words came out as a sob. "My beautiful girl. I didn't know you had a daughter." Mrs. Blackwood's face crumpled. "I don't. Not anymore." She wouldn't say anything else about it, and when I tried to guide her back to her room, she resisted, pressing her ear to the basement door. "She's so cold down there," she whispered. So cold and alone. I finally managed to coax her away from the door, but the incident left me deeply unsettled. Combined with the photograph and the strange scratching sounds, I was beginning to suspect that Thornfield Manor held secrets that Mrs. Blackwood wasn't sharing. That evening, I decided to investigate. I waited until Mrs. Blackwood was asleep, really asleep, not just resting with her eyes closed, and crept downstairs with a flashlight. The basement door was exactly where I'd expected to find it, tucked under the main staircase in an alcove that was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It was indeed locked, with an old-fashioned skeleton key lock that looked original to the house. But as I examined it more closely, I noticed scratches around the keyhole, as if someone had been picking the lock recently. The scratches were fresh, cutting through layers of old paint and rust. I pressed my ear to the door the way I'd seen Mrs. Blackwood do that morning. At first there was nothing. Then, so faint I might have imagined it, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Sobbing. Someone was crying behind that door. Not the scratching of an animal, but the unmistakable sound of human distress. "Hello?" I called softly, feeling foolish but compelled to try. "Is someone there?" The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt oppressive. Then, just as I was about to give up and return to my room, I heard it. "Help me." The voice was female, young, and filled with desperation. It was also coming from directly behind the door. My hand flew to the doorknob, but it was locked tight. I rattled it, pushed against the door, but it was solid wood and wouldn't budge. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Please." The voice came again, barely audible. "She keeps me here. She won't let me go." "I'm going to get help," I said, my heart racing. "I'm going to call the police." "No!" The voice was urgent now, frightened. "She'll know. She always knows. Find the key. Please, find the key." I heard footsteps above me. Mrs. Blackwood was awake. I had to get back to my room before she caught me at the basement door. But I couldn't leave, not knowing someone was trapped down there. "Where is the key?" I hissed. "Her room," came the whispered reply. "In her jewelry box. Please hurry." The footsteps were getting closer. I turned off my flashlight and crept back upstairs, my mind reeling. There was someone, a young woman by the sound of it, locked in Mrs. Blackwood's basement. But who, and why? The photograph in my pocket seemed to burn against my skin. The resemblance, the bars on the basement windows, Mrs. Blackwood's reaction to the image. It was all connected somehow. I made it back to my room just as I heard Mrs. Blackwood's door open down the hall. She moved around for a few minutes, then returned to her room. But I noticed she didn't close her door completely, as if she was listening for something. Or someone. The next day, Mrs. Blackwood was different. She watched me constantly, her gray eyes following my every movement. When I tried to make conversation, she responded with single-word answers. When I offered to help her with her bath, she declined, something she'd never done before. She knew. Somehow she knew I'd been at the basement door. I waited for an opportunity to search her room, but she barely left my sight all day. When she did go to the bathroom, I made a quick examination of her jewelry box, an ornate Victorian piece on her dresser, but it was locked as well. As evening approached, my anxiety grew. The woman in the basement, if there really was someone down there and I hadn't imagined the whole thing, was counting on me. But how could I get the key when Mrs. Blackwood was watching me so closely? The answer came at dinner. Mrs. Blackwood had been picking at her food, eating very little, when she suddenly swayed in her chair. Her face went pale, and she gripped the table edge. "I don't feel well," she said, her voice weak. Perhaps I need to lie down." I helped her to her room, genuinely concerned. Her pulse was rapid and her skin was clammy. I made sure she was comfortable and offered to call a doctor, but she refused. "It's just fatigue," she insisted. "I haven't been sleeping well. I'll be fine by morning." Within an hour, she was deeply asleep. Her breathing was even and her face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since I'd arrived. Whatever had caused her episode seemed to have passed. This was my chance. I waited another 30 minutes to be sure she was truly unconscious, then crept into her room with my flashlight. The jewelry box sat on her dresser like a challenge, its carved wooden surface gleaming in the dim light. The lock was small and delicate, but I'd learned a few things about picking locks during my college years, a skill acquired out of necessity when I'd locked myself out of my dorm room one too many times. It took several tense minutes, but finally, I heard the tiny click of the mechanism giving way. Inside the jewelry box, nestled among tarnished brooches and pearl necklaces, was a skeleton key. It was old and heavy, made of black iron that was cold to the touch. This had to be it. Mrs. Blackwood murmured in her sleep as I closed the jewelry box, and I froze, certain she was waking up. But she only turned over, still deep in slumber. I made my way downstairs, the key clutched in my sweaty palm. The house felt different at night, more alive somehow, as if the darkness awakened things that slept during the day. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like thunder, every whisper of wind through the walls like voices. The basement door waited for me in its alcove, unchanged and ominous. I inserted the key into the lock, and it turned with surprising ease, as if it had been used recently. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a staircase that descended into absolute darkness. The smell that wafted up was overwhelming. Damp earth, mold, and that same sweet organic scent I'd noticed on my first day, but stronger now, almost cloying. "Hello?" I called softly into the darkness. No response. I started down the stairs, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The basement was larger than I'd expected, stretching far beyond the footprint of the house above. The walls were stone, weeping with moisture, and the floor was packed dirt that squelched under my feet. As my eyes adjusted, I began to make out shapes in the darkness. What I saw made my stomach lurch. The basement was full of cages. They were old, made of rusted iron, and sized for humans. Most were empty, their doors standing open like hungry mouths. But one, in the far corner, was occupied. The beam of my flashlight found her, and I had to bite back a scream. It was the woman from the photograph. Exactly the woman from the photograph. Same face, same hair, same wide-set eyes that were now staring at me with desperate hope. She was wearing a white dress that might have been beautiful once, but was now stained and torn. Her hands gripped the bars of her cage, and I could see where her fingernails had been worn down to nothing from scratching at the metal. But that was impossible. The photograph was decades old. This woman should be elderly or dead. Yet here she was, looking exactly as she had in that faded image. "You came," she whispered, her voice the same one I'd heard through the door. "I knew you would. You look just like me." "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out as barely a croak. "My name is Margaret," she said. "Margaret Blackwood. And you're Sarah, aren't you? She told me about you." Blackwood. She had the same last name as Mrs. Blackwood. A relative, then. But she looked so young. "How long have you been down here?" I asked, moving closer to her cage. The lock was similar to the one on the basement door, and the key might work on both. "I don't know," Margaret said, and there was a heartbreaking confusion in her voice. Time doesn't work the same way down here. It was 1953 when she first brought me here. I was 23, but I don't feel older. I don't look older. The darkness, it preserves things. That was impossible. That was over 70 years ago. "She's my mother," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger as if talking about it gave her strength. "Or she was. She's changed since then. The basement changed her, just like it's changing you." "What do you mean, changing me?" Margaret's eyes filled with pity. "You feel it, don't you? The pull. The way the house seems to call to you at night. The way you can't stop thinking about what's down here. It's starting already." I did feel it. I'd felt it since the moment I'd arrived at Thornfield Manor. The strange compulsion to explore, to uncover secrets, to open doors that should remain closed. "Why?" I asked, fitting the key into the lock of Margaret's cage. "Why does she keep you here?" "Because she's afraid of dying alone," Margaret said simply. "She discovered this place when she was young, just like you are now, The basement is special. It exists between worlds, between life and death. Time moves differently here, and it's hungry. The lock clicked open, and Margaret stepped out of her cage with movements that were stiff from decades of confinement. Even in the dim light, I could see the resemblance between us more clearly now. We could have been twins. That's why she keeps bringing them here, Margaret continued. Young women who look like her, like us. She feeds us to the basement, and in return, it keeps her alive. But it's never enough. The basement is always hungry for more. Them? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Margaret gestured to the other cages, and I saw what I'd missed in my initial shock. They weren't all empty. Some contained bones, white and clean, arranged with care. Others held pieces of clothing, personal effects, photographs, all of young women. All with the same general features, dark hair, oval faces, wide-set eyes. All of them looked like me. She's been doing this for decades, Margaret whispered. Maybe longer. I was the first one she couldn't bring herself to finish. I reminded her too much of herself when she was young. So she kept me here as a companion. A daughter who would never leave her, never age, never die. The full horror of it crashed over me. Mrs. Blackwood wasn't just an elderly woman who needed care. She was a predator who had been luring young women to this house for decades, feeding them to whatever malevolent force existed in this basement. And I was next. We have to get out of here, I said, grabbing Margaret's hand. It was ice cold, like touching marble. We can't, she said sadly. The basement won't let us go. And even if we could escape, where would we run? She owns everything for miles around. The police, the townspeople, they all do what she says. They bring her the women she needs. Then we fight, I said, though I wasn't sure how we could fight something I didn't understand. Margaret smiled, and for the first time there was hope in her eyes. Maybe. You're different from the others, stronger, and you found the key. None of the others managed that. We made our way back to the stairs, but as we reached the bottom step, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps above us. Mrs. Blackwood was awake. Sarah. Her voice drifted down from the kitchen, sweet and innocent. Sarah, dear, where are you? Margaret gripped my arm. Don't answer her. Don't let her know you found me. But it was too late. The basement door, which I'd left open, creaked as Mrs. Blackwood appeared at the top of the stairs. She was silhouetted against the kitchen light, but I could see she was holding something in her hand. Oh, Sarah, she said, and her voice was filled with disappointment. I had such hopes for you. You seem so much more sensible than the others. She started down the stairs, and I could see what she was carrying. It was a large kitchen knife, its blade gleaming in the darkness. Margaret, darling, she called, her voice taking on a sing-song quality. Are you happy to see your new sister? She's not my mother, Margaret whispered to me. Not anymore. The basement took her humanity years ago. She's just a shell now, a guardian for this place. Mrs. Blackwood reached the bottom of the stairs and smiled at us. In the beam of my flashlight, her face looked different. Older, more skeletal, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. The basement needs feeding, she said conversationally. It's been so patient waiting for the right moment. But it can't wait much longer. It's starting to affect me, you see. I'm getting old, despite its gifts. I need fresh blood to renew the bargain. What bargain? I asked, backing away from her with Margaret. The same bargain every guardian makes, Mrs. Blackwood said, following us deeper into the basement. Life eternal in exchange for service. I feed it young women with the right qualities, and it keeps me alive. It's a fair trade. You're insane, I said. Am I? She tilted her head. I'm over 130 years old, Sarah. I've lived through 2 world wars, the Depression, the rise and fall of empires. I've seen my contemporaries age and die while I remain. Is that insanity or wisdom? We'd backed up against the far wall of the basement. There was nowhere else to go. Mrs. Blackwood approached slowly, savoring our fear. The basement doesn't just feed on death, she continued. It feeds on terror, on despair, on the slow dissolution of hope. That's why I keep them alive for so long first. The fear seasons the meat, you might say. Margaret stepped in front of me, protective. You don't have to do this, Mother. You could choose to die naturally. You could let it end. And leave you alone down here? Mrs. Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're my daughter, Margaret. My responsibility. I couldn't abandon you. This isn't love, Margaret said. This is selfishness. Mrs. Blackwood's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful child, do you know what I've sacrificed for you? What I've done to keep you with me? She raised the knife and I knew she was going to strike. But in that moment something strange happened. The basement itself seemed to react to the violence about to unfold. The air grew thick and heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The walls began to pulse with a faint, sickly light, and I heard them. Voices. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The voices of all the women who had died in this place, calling out in anger and anguish. They rose from the packed earth floor, from the stone walls, from whatever hellish dimension the basement touched. Mrs. Blackwood heard them too. Her confident expression faltered, replaced by fear. No, she whispered. It's not time. I've fed you well. I've kept our bargain. But the voices grew louder, more insistent. And with them came something else, a presence that filled the basement with malevolent intent. This was the thing that Mrs. Blackwood had been serving, the entity that hungered for young women's lives. It was done with her. The basement had found a new guardian, one younger and stronger. One who looked just like the woman who had served it for so many decades. Me. Mrs. Blackwood screamed as tendrils of shadow erupted from the floor, wrapping around her legs and arms. The knife clattered to the ground as she was pulled down into the earth itself. Sarah! Margaret grabbed my arm. We have to go now while it's distracted. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by what was happening to Mrs. Blackwood, by the horrible understanding that was dawning in my mind. The basement didn't want to kill me. It wanted to recruit me. All the clues had been there. The generous pay for a simple caretaking job. The isolated location. The way I'd been drawn to this place, compelled to take the position despite my misgivings. And most telling of all, my resemblance to all the other women who had been brought here. I wasn't a victim. I was a candidate. The presence in the basement pressed against my mind, and I felt its offer. Eternal life. Power over death itself. All I had to do was accept the role Mrs. Blackwood had played. Lure young women to this place, feed the basement, serve as its guardian, and in return I would never age, never die. I would have Margaret as a companion, and any other women I chose to keep alive. I could build my own little family of the lost and forgotten. All it would cost me was my humanity. Sarah, please. Margaret was shaking me now, tears streaming down her face. Don't listen to it. Fight it. But the offer was so tempting. I was 25 years old, with no family, no career prospects, no real future to speak of. Here I could have purpose, I could have immortality, I could have power. The presence pressed harder, and I felt my resistance crumbling. It would be so easy to say yes. So easy to accept the role that was being offered to me. But then I looked at Margaret. Really looked at her. At the decades of imprisonment written in her eyes, the way her body had wasted away despite the basement's preservation. At the other cages, the bones of women who had trusted the wrong person. This wasn't salvation. This was damnation. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The presence recoiled, surprised by my refusal. No, I said again, louder this time. I won't serve you. I won't become what she became. The basement erupted in fury. The walls began to crack, raining down chunks of stone and mortar. The sickly light flared brighter, casting dancing shadows that looked like reaching hands. Run! Margaret screamed. We ran for the stairs as the basement collapsed around us. Behind us, I could hear Mrs. Blackwood's final screams as the entity she had served for so long claimed her at last. The stairs creaked and groaned under our feet, but they held. We burst through the basement door and into the kitchen just as the floor beneath us gave way entirely. The basement was gone, collapsed into a pit that seemed to go down forever. But we weren't safe yet. The entire house was shaking now, as if the basement's destruction was affecting the structure above. We ran for the front door, Margaret's hand in mine, as windows shattered and beams splintered around us. We made it outside just as Thornfield Manor began to collapse in on itself. The building folded like a house of cards, floor by floor, until nothing remained but a pile of rubble and a cloud of dust. Margaret and I stood in the dawn light, holding each other as the dust settled. She was solid and warm now, no longer the cold, preserved thing she had been in the basement. The entity's destruction had freed her from its influence. "What now?" I asked. She smiled, and for the first time it was a smile free of fear or despair. "Now we live," she said. "Really live. We find somewhere far from here, and we make new lives for ourselves." "But the police? We'll find the bodies of all those women," Margaret finished, "and they'll assume we were victims who escaped. Let them think that. It's close enough to the truth." As we walked away from the ruins of Thornfield Manor, I couldn't help but look back one more time. In the rubble, something glinted in the morning sunlight. For just a moment, I thought I saw the outline of a door, the basement door, somehow intact despite the collapse. But when I blinked, it was gone. Margaret noticed my hesitation. "Don't look back," she said gently. "It's over now." I nodded and turned away. But as we reached the iron gate that marked the boundary of the property, I heard something that made me stop. Scratching, faint rhythmic scratching, coming from somewhere beneath the rubble. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Margaret heard it too. Her face went pale, and her grip on my hand tightened. "It's not over," she whispered. "It can't be destroyed. It just waits." As if in response to her words, I felt something brush against my mind. Not the overwhelming presence from before, but something smaller, more subtle. A whisper of possibility, a suggestion of power. The basement was gone, but the entity that had lived there wasn't. It was looking for a new home, a new guardian, and it had marked me as a potential candidate. I closed my eyes and concentrated, building walls in my mind, pushing the presence away. It retreated, but I could feel it watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. "We need to go," I said. "Now." We ran then down the country road that led away from Thornfield Manor. Behind us the scratching grew louder, more insistent, as if something was clawing its way up from deep underground. I don't know if we'll ever truly be free. The entity has tasted my mind now, knows my scent. It will follow us, I think, waiting for the right moment to make another offer. But for now, we're alive. We're together. And we're running toward a future that belongs to us, not to the hungry darkness that feeds on fear and despair. Though sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, I still hear that scratching. And sometimes I find myself wondering what it would have been like to say yes.